The news events of the last few days, especially the Robert Mueller investigation, shine a little bit of a light into the machinations of a world that we need to know a lot more about. And here to help us with that is our friend Marcy Wheeler. Marcy has been on the program before. She's an independent journalist who writes about national security and civil liberties issue. She writes as Empty Wheel in the blog of the same name. She's published in a number of outlets, including The Guardian, Salon, and The Progressive. And she also appears on television and radio to talk about this stuff, including right here. So first of all, Marcy, thanks for coming on the program.
Always good to be here.
Well, it's always good to have you because you're sane, you're balanced, this world is, people go running down one sort of side alley of complex stories, and sometimes I think get carried away. So let's start with this. Everybody's been talking about Paul Manafort, who is certainly a visible, colorful, flagrant figure, but there are those who say that the guilty plea of George Papadopoulos in the long run may prove to be even more important. Are you in that school of thought?
I think you have to take them together because the Papadopoulos guilty plea is meant to add to the number of reasons why Paul Manafort is going to want to flip and start cooperating with Robert Mueller.
So, to an outsider or someone who's not familiar with this stuff, we look at Manafort's charges and what he's been charged with, and we say, that's pretty tough stuff. But I think prosecutors, when they charge people, try to structure it, if they're really looking to make somebody flip, in a way, it's not just about winning an indictment, it's about getting them to flip. So you think all of this is a strategy to get Manafort to turn?
Oh, absolutely. The charges against Manafort were largely garden variety money laundering. They didn't mention any kind of cooperation with Russia, for example. And it's going to be a lot easier for Manafort to plead guilty to charges like that, although he'll lose all the suits off his back because they were the fruits of his money laundering. But it's easier to plead guilty to a charge like that than that he cooperated with the Russians to steal an election. And I think that is, that it's sort of almost a carrot to the stick of showing the Papadopoulos plea agreement and showing that the Mueller team has more information than probably Manafort assumed they did.
That's really interesting, and it brings up another question, which is if you look at the Manafort charges, and of course Trump made a big deal about this, especially before the Papadopoulos plea was revealed in the first hour or two. But if you look at the Manafort charges, it feels as if they were almost, they were almost segmented off from anything to do with the Trump campaign. They were before Trump began running for president. They were, as you say, these other unrelated issues. Now, as you and I talk, I wonder, you think that was a deliberate strategy to sort of not pollute what Manafort might have to say about the campaign by picking events that took place beforehand, before he hooked up with Trump on this stuff?
Right. I mean, right now he's facing something like 8 to 10 years, and that's going to be a lot easier to plead guilty to and try and get a cooperation agreement to lower the sentence from than, again, cooperating with Russia. But the other thing about it is about half of the charges against Manafort, Mueller could just punt right down to Eric Schneiderman in New York State and have him prosecute there. So they can be state charges. And as such, they aren't pardonable by the president, right? So if the president, the stupidest thing, don't tell him this, but the stupidest thing that Trump could do today would be to pardon Manafort because Manafort would lose his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination, so he'd have to talk to Mueller, but also he'd still be he'd still be prosecuted on the very same charges or half the same charges in New York State. So that, there's a lot of nifty things that Mueller did with the Manafort charges. The other thing that Mueller did with the Manafort charges was Tony Podesta, right? So the brother of John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, he's in legal trouble too for the same general hiding of this foreign agent serving pro-Russian Ukrainian powers in 2012. So, on top of the can't pardon, haven't tainted him with the collusion stuff, there's also the fact that Mueller is at least looking like a completely bipartisan prosecutor on this front.
Now, yeah, and that's a whole other dimension of this, is that a lot of these guys like Manafort and arguably like Tony Podesta, you talk to reporters who've covered foreign lobbying in this country, they never register under the Fara Act as they're supposed to. There have always been questions about money laundering and all that stuff. And that includes a lot of people in Washington. So was Robert Mueller just insulating himself from charges that this is a partisan witch hunt, or was that it? Is that the whole story of investigating Podesta? Was that what it was about?
Well, and remember that these are some of the same charges he would charge Mike Flynn with, not registering as an agent of a foreign power. Mueller is arguing that what Manafort and Gates did, Gates is his deputy, that what they did goes beyond just failing to register for Fara. He says that even after they went to DOJ and said, oops, sorry, we forgot, they made false statements to DOJ. So even if the whole Fara thing gets thrown out, which is what Manafort's lawyer is trying to do, he's been, all week he's been saying, oh my gosh, whoever thought Fara was a law? Right. But again, right, so Podesta is in trouble for it. Manafort, even if the Fara stuff is kind of ignored, there's still the fact that when he tried to clean up his Fara registration, he lied to DOJ about it.
So now let's take a breather, if we will, from some of the complexities of this case, just for a second, to give the audience a rest, Marcy Wheeler. And let's talk about, I know on social media you were talking about this, a lot of us have been scratching our heads. Mueller has been saying that a lot of Manafort's purchases were money, in effect, money laundering, including over $1 million. I think it was 1.3, if I remember correctly, in clothing.
Those are the suits, suits.
Yeah. Well, how do you do that? Are they gold lined, or are they? I mean, how many did he buy? 500? I think of like Richard Gere's closet in American Gigolo or something. That wouldn't get you. That wouldn't get you well, 1/10. What did he buy?
Yeah, one of the stores is in Beverly Hills. So 2 stores, 1.3 million. The thing I find flabbergasting is he laundered $1 million through the local antique rug store. And that was like Weekly Standard's big break of the week, was they found the store, although the store keeps hanging up on them. And everyone who they asked was like, it's impossible. I mean, there's no way in the DC area you can spend $1 million on rugs. So there were clearly kickbacks or something like that. So the rugs are the key issue. Like Manafort gets indicted on rugs, and the GOP response is to try and give him a tax cut.
Right. And also, by the way, people have been talking about the fact that he invested in Airbnb properties. And there was a thing in Bloomberg News, Manafort is the reason why people hate Airbnb, because people buy them as investment properties and launder money with them and do God knows what else. And then property values go up and locals can't afford to live there anymore. New Orleans, there was a story like that too. I think I've just squandered one of my planned monologues, but so there could have been, in other words, some sort of collusion on the part of shopkeepers or whatever, I guess, right? Because we don't know, but I mean, I
know that shop in Alexandria keeps hanging up the phone when reporters ask. So
I'd like to find out about that shop in Beverly Hills too. But now going back to the intricacies of the case. So you wrote about the fact that we don't really know. So George Papadopoulos pled guilty to lying to FBI agents about emails. And we keep hearing about these emails. And people, I think, are assuming they're the DNC emails that went to WikiLeaks or whatever. Do we know at this point, though, what those emails, what he was actually talking about, or what those emails were?
No, and it's important for people to remember that the Russians were hacking Democratic targets going back at least a year if you're talking just campaign and DNC. But if you're talking the State Department, they were hacking Hillary-related targets going back 2 years. So it could be anything. What's interesting about those emails, though, is that Papadopoulos learned about them and probably started sharing the information with the campaign on April 26, 2016, which is 3 days before the DNC learned that they had been hacked. So it's quite possible we're going to learn that the Republicans learned about the Hillary hack, the DNC hack at least, before the DNC did.
And before the public did, right? So that would be gigantic. And just as a parenthetical thing, I haven't tracked them lately, but there was that group, I forget what they're called, but the group of intelligence professionals, basically whistleblowers, Ray McGovern and John Kiriakou and all that, who were saying that there was actually no evidence that the DNC email leak was a hack, and they were sort of agreeing with WikiLeaks that it could have been a walk-in or somebody putting stuff on a drive or whatever. Whatever happened to them? Because this side, the hack side of the or explanation seems to be getting more and more evidence behind it as these indictments come down. Do you know if those guys said anything, or did they have a point to make, or was that just a diversion?
Their argument was that there were some files moved locally, meaning they weren't copied to Russia, they were copied locally. Already that's kind of who cares, because Russia has 8 properties in the immediate vicinity of DC. But the other thing, the Wall Street Journal today, this is a side note, but the Wall Street Journal revealed that separate prosecutors from Mueller are talking about charging the people who actually hacked the DNC. And one part of that investigation is in Philadelphia. And that would put venue in an East Coast locale where even if you buy what the beeps are saying, and not all of them bought off on that story, by the way, but even if you buy what they're saying, you've now got a locale in Philadelphia, which is just an hour away from DC. So, there's no point to their claim, because we know that there are plenty of local facilities where even if it were Russian citizens doing the copying, they could have done it local to DC.
So basically, their claim doesn't say what they think it says.
Right.
Yeah. So what should people be? I know that it's mind blowing for a lot of people to try to track this story, and people think they know what it means, and they think they know where it's going. What should people be looking for in upcoming revelations or follow-up stories on this topic of both Manafort and Gates and Papadopoulos?
Well, for example, on Thursday, Sam Clovis, who was Trump's nominee to be a top U.S. Department of Agriculture official, he withdrew his nomination. He is described in the Papadopoulos plea agreement as somebody who, as late as August 2016, was encouraging Papadopoulos to set up a meeting with the Russians. So he's withdrawn his nomination. His lawyer, Victoria Tonsig, earlier in the week was saying, he had something completely innocent to tell the grand jury a couple of, basically last week. But there are discrepancies already between what he claims he told the grand jury and what Papadopoulos said. So I would suspect that Clovis may be in more trouble than you think. Keep an eye on Manafort to see whether he's enticed to flip. There's a lot of silence coming from the Mike Flynn camp, which could mean he already has flipped. We don't know. And then the other really important part of this, aside from Trump being in the loop of these discussions about setting up a meeting with Russia, is that Jeff Sessions and Trump were at a meeting on March 31st, 2016 with Papadopoulos. And at that meeting, he basically said, my job on this campaign is to broker a meeting for you, Donald Trump, and Vladimir Putin. And that's important, A, because it makes it quite clear that Trump was in the loop on this stuff, and also in the loop before the June 9th, 2016 meeting at Trump Tower. But it's really important because Sessions lied about, he basically said he didn't know of any Trump surrogates who were setting up meetings with Russians. And we now know that he was in a meeting where he was discussing setting up meetings with the Russians. Now, he's saying anonymously, or people on his behalf are saying anonymously, that he shut down that idea. But one way or another, he was in a meeting. And
Right.
he has testified under oath that he doesn't believe that happened. So he's going to be in trouble again with both the intelligence and the judiciary committees because he lied to them.
Right. If I say never heard anyone discuss meetings with Russians, and then it comes out that they discussed meeting with Russians in my presence, and I said, "Oh, don't do that," that's still perjury. Right? I mean, because I didn't tell the truth, whatever my opinion of the idea itself was. So, all right, well, there's an enormous amount to cover here. And Marcy, I remember when we were all talking about Scooter Libby and Dick Cheney, and it feels like nothing ever changes, doesn't it?
A full decade ago was that trial, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, as always, thanks for your great insights and reporting on these issues. Marcy Wheeler of EmptyWheel.net. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much.